so we are back to talk about meal periods and rest breaks, and that's something that is very confusing, right? So, Jasmine, can you like kick us off, with what does the ordinance say about meal periods and rest breaks? Like what breaks are workers entitled to? We'll go into what happens if the meal period or rest break is interrupted. Maybe we'll just kind of focus on rest breaks today because it is so much to go into. So let's just kind of have the conversation go like flow, and talk about meal periods and rest breaks.
Sure. So, under the ordinance, domestic workers have the right to receive a 30-minute meal period for every 5 hours worked, as you mentioned, and a 10-minute rest break for every 4 hours worked. And so we'll go into the rest breaks for now, and we'll save meal periods for another conversation. So, with this 10 minutes for every 4 hours worked, um, those rest breaks are always paid through, and they must also be as close to the middle of that 4 hour period as possible. Actually, and they actually can't be later than the end of the third working hour of the 4 hour block of time. And now that sounds kind of confusing, but it's basically just you can't tack on a rest break like after 3 hours and 50 minutes and be like, okay, you can leave early and that's your rest break. So the idea is that the idea of, in terms of dictating the timing of that rest break is really just to ensure that it's closer to the middle of that 4 hour period so that the worker gets the rest that they need. And so yeah, no later than the third working hour of the 4 hour block of time for that 10-minute rest break. Those rest breaks should be, again, like I said, paid. They're always going to be paid rest periods. Um, and the worker can be required to remain on site, like meaning in the house, for that rest period. So typically one might think with a rest break they can do whatever they want, go anywhere. But if the hiring entity or the household says no, can you stick around the house or nearby the house, that would still count as a rest break, as long as the worker is allowed to make other personal choices about how they spend their time. They can get a snack, they can make a personal call, they can attend to their personal business, they could take a 5-minute nap, or kind of do whatever, as long as they feel like they're having that mental break. They can sort of stay at the house and still have that break. There is a chance that their break might be interrupted, especially in a childcare setting. If they're taking a 10-minute rest break, let's say a baby is napping and the worker is comfortable that the baby will nap, for whatever, at least like 45 minutes or more. So that worker may decide, okay, I'll be able to take my 10-minute rest break now. If the baby cries or if there's some kind of interruption, then the break restarts at the end. Restarts whenever they're able to then go back to having that kind of rest period. I mentioned the example of childcare and the nanny, and that's a question we get a lot in childcare. Like, how does my nanny take a break? I think it's a little more straightforward when you're talking about house cleaning or gardening, because but I think childcare, but also home care, anytime you're taking care of someone, there may not be an opportunity for that worker to take a real break, a real rest break. And I think in that case, the household has to be really honest and say, can the worker, even if they're remaining, in the house, maybe with a baby monitor in the background or something in the background, can they really can they really kind of unplug or whatever, or in this case, plug into like go just like scroll on their phone or do whatever and just like not think about the person that they're caretaking for. If they can, then then I think it has to be an understanding with your worker that they can take that break then. If they can't, if say, even if the baby is able to nap, but they're a light sleeper, or there's a lot of interruptions in their nap, or if there's other duties that the household is asking that nanny or person to do, like fold laundry, do dishes, that can only be done while the baby is napping. If there are other circumstances where that person really isn't taking a break, and it's impossible or infeasible to take a break in those circumstances, then the worker is entitled to an extra 10 minutes of pay for every 4 hours worked where they cannot take a break.
When I had the chance to be a living nanny, which is slightly a different um, topic, but at the end of the day, I'm relieved. And then it's like dinner time, and you're there supporting, or just chatting with the family, chatting about the day, or like chatting about your plans. But that if you're still on duty and you're still watching the kids and supporting and like bringing in the chairs for the table, or getting the plates ready, or doing whatnot, and you're still working and being in that kind of position, I don't know what to call it, right? It's then you're still like on the job, and you should be compensated for that. So if the person that is going out for lunch and it's like, oh, I'm gonna bring the baby, I'm carrying the diaper bag, I'm gonna do this thing, I'm gonna help you like entertain the baby while you're getting the order ready, I'm gonna do this thing, to go into the bathroom, I'll watch the kid. So that's not a real break, right? You're still on the duty, even though yes, it's like casual and like fun, and you're being treated like a nice human being that is valued, and loved and welcomed into the family. That's still not a break. It's a beautiful gesture, but it's still, that person will need to have, a break, a breather, a time for them to like umuhay later on, and then be able to go back to the duties of the job. So I love that. I love seeing that more, but it's definitely, that person will still need a break, or be compensated for the break they missed, right? Because if they weren't able to take their first break in the beginning of the day, then that means that they have to be compensated for that break. um so yeah, that's my take there, but also please feel free to contradict or correct me if I'm mistaken.
So yeah, I mean, I think Doris put it so well, and I think we haven't gone into meal breaks as much, so I think Jasmine hasn't laid out the exact parameters that need to be met for it to be a meal break, but I think it will align with what Doris said. And I think again, it comes to it like consent and making and talking about it ahead of time as well. But also recognizing if you're an employer, like your power in that relationship. So just making sure it's really a space where a worker feels comfortable, to be honest. But it made me think of like when I've worked at office jobs and we've had like a team day or a team lunch, and even though it's more fun and you get to talk to people, you still have to be there for it. And so you still get paid. Everywhere I've worked, we've always gotten paid for that team day. We've gotten paid for that lunch if we're required to be there. Because maybe we would choose, even though it's very nice to bond with our families, to bond with our teammates, it might not be our choice. You're still on the clock when you're doing that. So I think you can relate it. If you've had that experience yourself, you can relate it to that experience too. I wanted to say one other thing, but Jasmine, that goes back to what we were saying before. Just something about the rest breaks. And I think Doris brought up that some employers want workers like who might be a nanny or might be doing home care to like wash the dishes, make dinner, do laundry, all those things. So I think this comes up a lot. I'm on a lot of like, Facebook groups for parents and things like that to kind of make sure I can supply some information when it's needed. And it comes up a lot in those spaces, these types of conversations of what can you kind of expect a nanny to do. And again, it really is about having a conversation in the beginning to make sure that these expectations are really clear. and that they're agreed to. And that's not just throwing this other work because you're like, oh, this person's in my home to do childcare, so they can also do all these other things. They can also clean, because then they're also your house cleaner at the same time. It's like that's not a, a reasonable expectation to have, and that's something that really needs a discussion and maybe needs more pay. There's other things that come into play. But so, and then I think when we're considering meal breaks and rest breaks, you have to look at those expectations that you have, that you've maybe already had when you haven't done meal and rest breaks, and think about, is it really doable? Is it really doable? What are my expectations for how the house looks at the end of the day, or something like that? And is that real? And can someone do that while they're also taking these breaks? Because a worker might feel like, it's very loud here, a worker might feel like they can't take those breaks because you're going to get upset that they didn't do all the dishes. So yeah, it's just something that, again, needs to be discussed and worked out.
Really, the only difference with a meal period, well, there's multiple differences, but it's really, there's this distinction between when you have an unpaid meal period versus when you have a paid meal period. So backing up, a meal period is required, a 30-minute meal period is required for every 5 hours of work. And the meal period is similarly, there's similar parameters around, the fact that this meal period needs to be a true period of rest where they can actually get a meal or kind of attend to their business or do what they want for those 30 minutes. There is a similar consideration, all the considerations around, are you making it such that the worker can't actually take that meal period by giving extra duties or, or other expectations. That's all similarly, that's all very similar with the meal period as well. I think the main thing is, typically, a worker is entitled to an unpaid meal period when they can be completely relieved of duties, when they're free to leave the premises, when they can do like whatever they want. So kind of like what Doris was saying with folks working from home, if someone can, if there's a person who can actually come and like, take care of their kids while a nanny can just even leave the house or do whatever, that could be an unpaid meal period. Now, if a worker has access to an unpaid meal period, they can waive that unpaid meal period, because maybe a worker doesn't want to have 30 minutes unpaid and they'd rather just work straight through and and get paid through that. If there's really a choice for that worker, they can waive that unpaid meal period. However, if the meal period scenario is very similar to a rest break scenario, meaning they kind of have to stay, on the premises, it's maybe done, while they're kind of sort of on call, not that they have to completely pay attention to their work, but they could be interrupted and called back to work, like if a baby starts crying during a nap that's normally very solid. Then that has to be a paid meal period where they can take their they can take their meal period break, but it's not they don't have the choice to waive it or to go wherever they want. It's just like they have to be paid through those 30 minutes, and those 30 minutes of rest, count as their work hours. So that's kind of a tricky distinction. And I think it's hard because, as Dana was saying, a lot of households aren't used to being employers. So this is a very common concept if you're like working for a business. Like, a lot of businesses know the difference between a paid meal period and an unpaid meal period. And we're just kind of transporting that concept to the home. Typically, if you're not able to completely relieve a worker, in this case a nanny or a a home care worker, they would probably be entitled to a paid meal period, or not be able to take the break at all. And this is where you, again, have to be honest with yourself, like as an employer, as you know, are they really able, even if they're required to be in the house, and you know, are they actually able to take a break and do kind of what they need to do in the home? If they're not, then it would be impossible or infeasible to take that break, and then the worker is owed an additional 30 minutes of pay for their time. So there's a wrinkle of the unpaid meal period that makes it really confusing.
What happens when two households hire one nanny or one worker, right?
Both entities are liable. Both entities have to make sure they're ensuring their workers' breaks and make the best attempt to have those to provide those breaks. I think it's I've heard from I work I did a couple nanny shares. Like, it's commonly known when you work for two families and both families bring in their kids either to a home, or you switch, you alternate between homes. And I think having those first initial conversations on, you both are going to, you know, provide me or make sure that I get this rest or these breaks, I'm sorry, and you are, you know, it's either in either house, and in the case of missing the break, you both have to pay, right? Like, they both, I guess in this case, will be shared cost, right? In the case of a missed break. So making sure that they both have this conversation at the end of the day, which I want to clarify, make the most effort to do it in the work time. Don't make your worker stay longer for the sake of you to get your update of the day. Please, please, please. I know this is not specifically about rest and breaks, but it is about respecting people's times and rest time and off time, right? So as much as rest breaks and meal breaks are important for workers to have, it is important for them to leave on time. So if you want your updates, if you want to know what happened during the day, make the effort to get home earlier, to have that conversation with your employee, and relieve this person on time, so they can go and be with their families and take care of their family members, or whatever other needs they have to go and do on their personal time. So making sure that you want to have those conversations, do them on the schedule that you have, you know, already is assigned for them to be at work and on duty. So just starting out there too, I think it is very important for people and be more mindful of it, right? Because myself, you know, I remember many times just like leaving 20 after I was done, just for the sake of giving them the update of the day or like whatever happened. And, you know, it's like, you're like, and then you don't get paid for that, right? So one, being respectful of the time. And if you want your worker to stay and give you that update or have that conversation about what happened during the day, or plan about the next day, make sure you pay that person for that time. I think it's very important, as much as paying people for their rest breaks and their meal breaks. And sorry, I went out off the tangent here, but I think it was needed to be mentioned. So appreciate the time for it.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Dort. There was another time in our conversation where it was like, have this, and I was going to say, make sure you pay for that conversation. So yeah, absolutely. You know, a good thing to do would be schedule maybe regular check-ins where you know you're going to extend the time and you both agree to that time extensions paid for, or just making sure that, or extending the hours for 15 minutes a day if that's, again, with an agreed upon decision when you're going to check in. But yeah, always paying for that time. Gosh, now I swear I've forgotten what I think I was just going to say, I don't have a lot to add, but with the nanny share, you know, it just brings up again, conversations, having difficult conversations. Sometimes they're not difficult. Sometimes they are awkward, especially for us in the Northwest. You know, it's like sometimes avoiding that conflict, but you know, we do have to have those conversations. I know I'm in a nanny share, and sometimes it does bring up things where we might, myself and the other family, we might have some different ideas about some things, and we have to talk them through. And it can be awkward, you know, to do that, but we just have to raise them. And it's the same with this. I mean, there are times when, because I'm in this work and I know all the rules, I might know something that my, you know, the nanny share parents don't know, and I want to handle it differently. And so we just have to have that kind of conversation. So it's great practice for all of us to get to have these conversations and become better and better at difficult conversations.
I was going to say that I think that I really appreciate the note about conversations and having to pay for that time, and that, because that is what I tell people all the time. It's like, really, the law is supposed to be just the start. It's to help you start a conversation about how to respect and protect your workers' rights. And the one thing I wanted to note is that it occurs to me, we've been talking a lot about nannies and sort of by extension home care workers who kind of have similar needs. And I don't want to leave off that, you know, these breaks also apply to gardeners and house cleaners and cooks and household managers. And these, I think the household managers might be a whole nother demographic or topic for us. But I think that, especially with folks who, you know, I think a lot of folks in Seattle maybe aren't used to like really interacting with their gardeners or their house cleaners. Like, I remember talking to one hiring entity that was like, yeah, they have my door code and they just come in and I come home and my house is clean. And this was before, you know, pandemic time, so maybe now it's different. But I think that the notice of rights document, the model notice of rights document that we have, and also the resources that are at hand on Hand in Hand's website can really help with those conversations when you're actually not used to having daily conversations like you would be with a nanny or a home care worker, where you can at least say, you know, here's the terms of our contract, and here's how we're going to pay you, and you can take a break even though we're not around the house. You should feel free to take a paid rest break if you're here more than 4 hours, and don't feel shy about sitting down for 10 minutes if you need to, especially in such physically demanding jobs. And so yeah, so like, have those conversations. If you normally don't talk to your worker, like, I think having resources like the notice of rights or like the model contracts that are at Hand in Hand can be helpful to be those conversation starters.